Staff Sergeant Luna Navarro heard the whispered comment as she entered the military intelligence briefing room. "She's probably just here to take notes for someone important." The words cut deeper than the blast fragments still embedded in her right shoulder from her final mission in Afghanistan. What the assembled officers and analysts didn't know was that the quiet, 33-year-old former intelligence specialist was about to present classified evidence that would expose a decades-old cover-up and fundamentally change how the military understood one of its most controversial operations in Vietnam. Staff Sergeant Luna Navarro adjusted the strap of her document bag as she took a seat near the back of the secure briefing room at Fort Belvoir, Virginia. At 33, she moved with the measured precision of someone whose military career had ended abruptly when enemy fire destroyed her intelligence collection site in Kandahar province. The titanium pins in her shoulder served as daily reminders of the mission that had cost her team 3 good soldiers and nearly her own life. The morning briefing concerned Operation Prairie Fire, a classified Vietnam-era program that remained partially redacted even 50 years after its conclusion. Colonel Harrison commanded the Historical Review Board, while Dr. Patricia Hendricks led the civilian research team examining declassified materials for potential public release. Luna's civilian clothes and observer status marked her as different from the uniformed intelligence officers and defense contractors filling the room. Her worn leather document bag contained materials that most attendees assumed were standard reference, documents or personal notes from her own military service. Stories about veterans like Luna remind us that truth has no expiration date. Consider subscribing to hear more about the incredible men and women who never stop serving their country through their pursuit of justice and transparency. Luna's exceptional analytical abilities had been shaped by her grandmother, Elena Navarro, who had worked as a signals intelligence analyst for the Women's Army Corps during the Vietnam War. Growing up in El Paso, Luna spent countless hours listening to her grandmother's stories about intercepting and decrypting enemy communications, learning to recognize patterns in seemingly random data. Her grandmother had instilled in her a deep respect for the power of information and the responsibility that came with handling classified materials. Elena had often spoken about operations where critical intelligence had been ignored or suppressed, leading to unnecessary casualties that could have been prevented through better analysis and communication. Luna's own military career began with top scores in intelligence training at Fort Huachuca. During her deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, she had specialized in signals intelligence and pattern analysis, developing innovative techniques for tracking insurgent networks through communication intercepts. Her work had directly contributed to dozens of successful operations and probably saved hundreds of American lives. The mission that ended her career had been investigating reports of a possible intelligence leak that was compromising coalition operations. Luna's team had been gathering evidence when they were targeted by a precisely coordinated attack that suggested someone with access to classified information had betrayed their location. What drove Luna wasn't personal revenge or professional recognition. Her grandmother had died 2 years earlier, taking with her decades of unanswered questions about intelligence failures that had cost American lives. Someone needed to ensure that institutional secrecy didn't continue, protecting those responsible for operational disasters. The tension in the briefing room became apparent when Colonel Harrison explained that Operation Prairie Fire remained classified due to ongoing national security concerns. The historical review was limited to examining already declassified materials, with no authority to investigate allegations that contradicted official accounts. Dr. Hendricks added that their research focused on documenting established facts rather than pursuing conspiracy theories or unsubstantiated claims. When Luna raised her hand during the question period to ask about discrepancies she'd identified between official reports and signals intelligence transcripts, several officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Colonel Harrison responded that civilians without current security clearances couldn't access the classified materials necessary to understand the complete operational picture. The dismissive attitude escalated when Luna mentioned specific details about communication, intercepts that contradicted the official timeline of events. Dr. Hendricks suggested that family stories about classified operations often contained inaccuracies, and that emotional attachment could lead to misinterpretation of fragmentary evidence. Major Peterson, the briefing's intelligence liaison, questioned whether someone without formal intelligence training could properly analyze intercepted communications, particularly materials that required understanding of Cold War-era encryption methods and operational context. His tone implied that amateur researchers often drew dramatic conclusions from routine intelligence activities. The breaking point came when Luna referenced specific call signs and communication protocols that appeared in her grandmother's personal records but had been omitted from declassified operational reports. Colonel Harrison stated firmly that unauthorized possession of classified materials violated federal law and suggested that Luna's documents were either fabricated or obtained through improper channels. The academic and military audience nodded approvingly at this response, clearly comfortable with the implication that institutional authority trumped inconvenient evidence. Several attendees whispered among themselves, obviously questioning Luna's motives and credibility. Luna realized that the review board was designed to validate existing narratives rather than investigate uncomfortable truths. The officials weren't interested in evidence that might require acknowledging past mistakes or reopening classified investigations that could embarrass senior leaders or compromise ongoing operations. During the break, Luna sat alone in the hallway, holding a faded photograph of her grandmother in Women's Army Corps uniform. Eleanor's face showed the quiet confidence of someone who understood that her work mattered, even if she could never discuss it publicly. The photograph was taken shortly before Elena's assignment to a signals intelligence unit that officially didn't exist. The dismissive attitudes reminded Luna of her own experiences with military intelligence bureaucracy, where inconvenient findings were often buried to protect operational security or senior officer reputations. She'd seen critical intelligence ignored when it contradicted preferred operational assumptions and understood how institutional loyalty could override professional obligations to report accurate information. But this situation felt different. Her grandmother had spent 40 years carrying the burden of knowledge about intelligence failures that had cost American lives in Vietnam. Eleanor had carefully preserved documents and recordings because she believed that someday the truth would need to be told to honor the soldiers who had died because of preventable intelligence failures. The weight of family legacy pressed down on Luna like her old combat gear. Her grandmother's generation of intelligence analysts had been sworn to secrecy about operations that remained classified decades after their strategic value had expired. Eleanor had taken most of her secrets to the grave, but she'd entrusted Luna with evidence that could finally provide answers to families who had never learned why their loved ones died in what appeared to be intelligence ambushes. The afternoon session focused on specific operational details that remained classified, but Luna recognized several incidents that matched her grandmother's documented accounts of intelligence intercepts that had been ignored or suppressed. When Colonel Harrison mentioned unexplained casualties during certain operations, Luna knew she possessed communications transcripts that explained exactly how enemy forces had obtained advance warning. The situation became critical when Dr. Hendricks presented the official conclusion that Operation Prairie Fire had achieved its strategic objectives. Despite some tactical setbacks, Luna realized that the review board was preparing to seal the historical record without addressing evidence that contradicted fundamental assumptions about the operation's success and failure. Patterns. Major Peterson's presentation included casualty statistics that Luna knew were incomplete. Her grandmother's records documented American deaths that had been attributed to other operations or classified as training accidents to conceal intelligence failures. The cover-up wasn't just historical revisionism, it was ongoing institutional protection of people whose mistakes had killed American soldiers. When Luna requested permission to present additional evidence, Colonel Harrison reminded her that the proceedings were limited to officially sanctioned materials. He suggested that family memorabilia, however well-intentioned, couldn't challenge comprehensive military records maintained by professional historians and intelligence officials. The audience grew restless as Luna persisted with questions about specific operational details. Several officers began checking their phones and gathering materials, obviously considering the session concluded. Colonel Harrison announced that the review board had sufficient information to complete its historical assessment without requiring additional civilian input. Luna realized that waiting for permission or official approval would ensure that her grandmother's evidence never saw daylight. Sometimes serving your country required challenging the very institutions you'd sworn to protect. Without requesting permission, Luna opened her document bag and removed a collection of audio recordings, communication transcripts, and decoded intelligence reports that her grandmother had secretly copied before leaving military service. She announced that these materials contained evidence of systematic intelligence failures and cover-ups that had directly resulted in American casualties during Operation Prairie Fire. Colonel Harrison immediately demanded that she stop, warning that unauthorized disclosure of classified materials constituted a federal crime. But Luna had already begun playing an audio recording of intercepted enemy communications that revealed advanced knowledge of American troop movements, communications that had been received and decoded but never forwarded to operational commanders. The briefing room fell silent as the recording continued, documenting specific details about planned ambushes that matched historical casualty reports with chilling accuracy. Luna's grandmother's voice could be heard in the background, translating intercepted messages that warned of American deaths that could have been prevented through proper intelligence distribution. Luna presented additional evidence showing that multiple intelligence reports had been suppressed or altered before reaching field commanders. Her grandmother's meticulous records documented a pattern of institutional negligence that had prioritized operational security over American lives, allowing enemy forces to repeatedly exploit intelligence gaps that senior officers knew existed. The assembled officers and analysts stared in shock as Luna methodically destroyed the official narrative that had protected reputations and careers for decades. Her evidence was too detailed and technically accurate to dismiss as fabrication, and her grandmother's credentials as a legitimate intelligence analyst gave the materials unquestionable authenticity. Colonel Harrison realized that Luna possessed documentation that would require reopening investigations, acknowledging institutional failures, and potentially pursuing criminal charges against officers who were still alive. The aftermath was swift and transformative. Within hours, Luna's evidence had reached the Pentagon's Inspector General office, triggering a comprehensive review of Operation Prairie Fire and related intelligence operations. Colonel Harrison's historical review board was suspended pending criminal investigation of the cover-up that Luna's materials had exposed. Major Peterson, who had questioned Luna's credibility, formally apologized and requested assignment to the expanded investigation team. He admitted that institutional loyalty had blinded him to evidence that should have been pursued decades earlier. Regardless of its implications for senior leadership, Dr. Hendricks withdrew her research conclusions and began working with Luna to properly analyze the intelligence materials that had been suppressed for 50 years. The collaboration between academic historians and veteran families became a model for future investigations of classified operations. Most significantly, Luna's evidence led to formal acknowledgement of previously unrecognized casualties and the award of posthumous decorations to soldiers whose deaths had been classified as training accidents. 23 families finally received accurate information about how their loved ones had died serving their country. The Pentagon established new protocols requiring independent review of historical classifications, with veteran family members serving as permanent advisors to prevent future cover-ups. When Luna visited her grandmother's grave that evening, she placed a copy of the official acknowledgement on the headstone. Elena Navarro's 40-year burden of secret knowledge had finally been lifted, and the truth she'd preserved had honored the memory of soldiers whose sacrifices had been hidden but never forgotten. Luna's pursuit of justice had rewritten history. and ensured that institutional secrecy could never again protect those responsible for preventable American deaths.